Welcome to Know Before You Go for the 26th Sunday in Ordinary Time. I'm Father Don Goergen. Our reading today, our gospel, is from the Gospel according to Luke, which is known many times as the Gospel of Compassion. We've been reading from Luke now for several weeks. The Gospel of Compassion, or mercy, because Luke records some parables that we do not find in the other Gospels, such as the story of the prodigal son, forgiving father, in other words, where mercy is emphasized. It's quite interesting because last Sunday's text, as well as today's Gospel, challenge us strongly. What does come through, of course, is Luke's, or we say Jesus's, profound concern for the poor. But this is highly emphasized in the gospel according to Luke. Last week and this week also, our first reading comes from the prophet Amos. And Amos is known as the prophet of social justice because, again, he says it in such a straightforward, forthright way, challenges those who consciously, in a way, are corrupt and attempt in some ways to make money on the backs of the poor. Likewise today, Amos continues to challenge. Last week's reading ended with, you cannot serve two masters, both God and mammon, or God and wealth. In other words, we tend to accumulate wealth. We tend to value wealth. Much of our self-esteem is placed upon what we have rather than who we are. And although there can be tremendously generous philanthropists, the reality is that this tendency toward greed is something that Luke challenges. We come back to that same theme in the story we have in the gospel today, which is the story of a rich man and a poor man, Lazarus. Lazarus, in a way, who begged at times for just scraps from the table where the rich man ate. And as the story unfolds, both die, and the poor man, Lazarus, finds himself in the bosom of Abraham. And the rich man finds himself in what we would consider hell or Gehenna. And so the rich man pleads with Abraham, just let Lazarus, who begged at my table, let Lazarus reach out and touch my tongue with some moisture to just lighten in some ways my thirst. And Abraham replies that, of course, there is this gulf between us. That's not possible. And then the rich man begs again, please send someone then to my brothers so that they know this kind of place. And Abraham says, even if we sent them prophets, even if someone rose from the dead, they wouldn't listen, just as you didn't listen when you were alive. So this contrast between, let's not say simply someone who is rich, but someone who is both wealthy and insensitive to the needs of the poor, who tends to accumulate at the expense of others, who marginalizes others and takes a great pride in all that one has, rather than distributing the wealth, the one who accumulates it. So what are we to make of that? What is the challenge for us today? Well, it's quite obvious in many ways that are we aware of the needs of those in our world, whether it be migrants at the border, whether it be the poor in our own cities, whether it be the victims, say, of the hurricane in Puerto Rico. There are those in our world, such as those dying in the war in Ukraine. Do our hearts reach out to them And from the surplus of our goods, do we struggle to find ways to be of help, not only by giving from whatever wealth we may or may not have, but what are the resources that we find within ourselves to help to alleviate the burden placed on the backs of those who are desperate? Luke is the gospel of compassion. And in that gospel of Luke, whereas Matthew says, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect, Luke says, be compassionate as your heavenly Father is compassionate. But we have to realize that that compassion is not only toward us, that God will be merciful towards me. God certainly will be merciful towards me, but God still has expectations. And if we go back to last Sunday, we can't say we love God if we don't love our neighbor. We can't say that we serve God if our main service is to the accumulation of wealth. And so in today's gospel, do I identify with the poor man thirsting for simply something to quench his thirst or his hunger? Or do I identify with the rich man who, while on earth, was unwilling to be aware of his obligation? Or do I identify with neither, because I'm not desperately poor and because I haven't accumulated lots of wealth? But the challenge is still there before the hour comes when I too am judged. What will I have done with my life to have made the world a more wholesome and healthy place within which all might live? It is a challenge indeed for us to ponder, because we ought not wait till after we die to take a look at our lives. The time to do so is now, today. How am I living out in my life the compassion that God has for the disadvantaged and the poor? May God bless you in your own reflections.